Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Post-Election Group Therapy with the New Republic. It is a pleasure to be with you here tonight. I am Katie McDonough, a deputy editor here, and I feel very lucky to be joined by our panel. My colleagues Matt Ford, Osita Nwanevu, Walter Shapiro, along with Rachel Bitecofer, editor of The Cycle, host of the Election Whisperer podcast, and senior advisor to the Election Project, the Lincoln Project, the Election Project. So we've got a lot to cover tonight, obviously, so let's get right into it. I'm going to start with, I feel like, what is maybe the first question on everyone's mind, which is the election done? Have we finished the election yet? So Matt, the president has not yet accepted the results of the election and is working along with most of his party's leadership to discredit it and challenge President-elect Biden's win. So can you kind of walk us through the status of the court challenges first, and then let us know if are we in a coup? Are we in a coup cosplay? Or is this just a dry run for a coup? So I'll let you take it from there.
Well, thank you. And yeah, I think that I'll answer those questions in reverse by saying I don't think this is a coup. But I think that the reason that word is coming up is because we don't really have a lot of experience in American history with what we're seeing right now. We have not had in our history a sitting president who has tried to delegitimize the results of an election that he won and launched sort of a madcap legal bid to secure power. So I don't really blame people for wondering if this is a coup, but at the same time, I don't think it is for two reasons. One, it doesn't have a lot of the hallmarks that political scientists typically associate with coups. We don't see tanks rolling down Pennsylvania Avenue. We don't see the government seizing broadcasters. We don't see jailing and arrests of dissident lawmakers. It's pretty grim sounding, but I guess you got to find the positive somewhere. The second reason I wouldn't call this as a coup is because it's not really working. Trump's legal strategy is haphazard at best, and certainly not all that coherent. And it's not winning anyone over everywhere. There are hundreds of judges in this country, many with divergent views on a variety of legal issues, and he has yet to persuade a single one that he has found evidence of voter fraud, that he has found evidence of some sort of systemic irregularities, that he deserves to have the results reversed. And now your first question was, is the election over? And legally speaking, it's not. What we think of as the presidential election, the sort of, vote on election night, the results come in, the AP announces it, the other candidate, concedes, and then we have a few months of transition period. That's not really the mechanism that the Constitution prescribes. Over the next few weeks, we'll see states certify the results. We'll see them send those results to Congress, and they'll hold the counting of the electors, and the Electoral College will sort of gather. They don't all actually get in one place, but they will have their votes counted, and Joe Biden will win that process. So while it may seem like the outgoing Trump administration will try to launch a lot of legal challenges, the sheer fact of it is that they don't have the mechanisms and power to actually throw this off course.
So I want to also just sort of turn to Osita. I know you've done some thinking on what is going on right now and what the Trump administration is attempting, even just narratively. I wonder if you can also sort of speak to this question of like coup light, no coup. Where do you come in on that?
Well, I agree with Matt that whatever is going on, it's not working very well, and there's no real expectation. I think among people who are watching the president's legal cases seriously, that any of them are actually going to prevail. They're just going to get up to the Supreme Court, and you'll have the justices ratify whatever he's sent up there. I don't really see any evidence that that's what's in the works. But I do think it's very disturbing, whether you want to call it a coup or not. I mean, you do have a president who is saying that the election should be functionally overturned for no other reason but the fact that he lost, and he's inventing conspiracy theories and promoting conspiracy theories to justify that position. It's a remarkable thing, even if you don't think it's actually going to succeed. It's a remarkable thing too that the Republican Party is indulging him on this and humoring him on this. I've written a piece that basically argues that what Republicans are doing is for show, that they're trying to find a way to sort of, to let Trump's base down without explicitly saying that Trump has failed, and that they've, Trump has outlasted his usefulness for the party. But that is, I think, what they substantively believe. They think that he's lost this election. They think that they've gotten everything that they can out of a Trump presidency, and they're ready to move on. So they're going to do this song and dance where they say, well, we should look into what Trump is saying about voter fraud and all this. But substantively, I don't think we're seeing very many Republicans at the state level, at the local level, doing very much to aid this effort. And even, frankly, people in Trump's circle are said to be, polishing up their resumes and looking for the exit door. And all of that might change, with the next couple of weeks. It's still a kind of a fluid situation. But right now, I'm not too worried that this is going to work. I am deeply disgusted, as I think every American should be, nevertheless, that this kind of thing is going on.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the sort of, to what Matt and Osita have both been describing, it's just something we haven't witnessed here before. And so I think however you'd like to describe it, the sense of disturbance about the normal order of things. Rachel and Walter, before I move on to the next question, I wanted to also turn to you guys and see if you had anything to add here.
I just want to say that the Trump approach to a coup is the same approach that couldn't tell the difference between the Four Seasons Hotel in Philadelphia and Four Seasons Total Landscaping. This is a Four Seasons Total Landscaping coup, which means lots of claims, lots of shouts, next to a porn shop, more relevantly, across the street from a crematorium, and it's going to have about the same effect.
Oh, Rachel, I think you might be muted. The hazards of the Zoom panel.
Yeah, I mean, I think the greater probability is that is what we're looking at. I mean, they're really setting up the stage for two plays. Play one is what the other panelists describe, a song and dance, if you will, of giving the baby his baba and letting him do his temper tantrum. But they are making chess moves also in the background that, I think General McCaffrey and others see as problematic. I certainly do too. It's not like they are not also moving chess pieces that could indicate something more serious. I mean, the firings of the DOD and the reorganization of that agency, I think McCaffrey's right, is the type of movement an idiot would do if they were trying to not leave office and didn't really understand how to stave off a transition of power against an opposition that didn't want to concede to, I mean, they won the election, right? And they obviously going to want to claim that victory. And if you don't really understand how to properly stage a coup, and a moron would design the plan that would run through possibly putting a bunch of friendlies in charge of the DOD in the places where they did. So, it certainly is something that I would not brush off and laugh at. I mean, Democrats have had a tendency to underestimate the right in key ways strategically. I mean, case in point, we look at the doubling of support among African Americans and Latinos in the cycle. This was something too that the left brushed off and assumed was laughable, that the Parscale Death Star was going to target these voters to tell them that Democrats took them for granted, that Biden's work on the crime bill in the 1990s would be then leveraged against him to siphon off Black voters, because of course Trump is contemporaneously racist, as is the contemporaneous GOP platform. And yet here we are sitting 9 days post an election in which we can see data that affirms absolutely that Death Star did just that. So I am much less willing to just discount it all. Certainly Mike Pompeo seemed to be indicating his belief that Donald Trump will be carrying out a second term.
I think you raise an interesting point that kind of leads me to my next question about which voters were or were not taken for granted, the kind of outreach, what the kind of mobilization efforts were this cycle. And so actually I wanted to ask Osita, so right now we're seeing this major split among Democrats about what these election results actually mean, precisely for the reasons that Rachel just described. But the outcomes at both the federal, state, and ballot race level feel so varied in some ways that you could almost pick the narrative that you'd like and kind of run with that. So I wanted to see kind of, what do you think, if you could extract a meta narrative at all from this election, what do you think your takeaways are about what Democrats, the sort of inter-party wars right now?
I think I believe that meta narratives are to be avoided right now. I think that's the first thing I believe. But look, I've been interested in the fact that the post-election discourse seems to be proceeding as though the election never actually happened. It's exactly the same debate we've been seeing within the Democratic Party over the last couple of years. You have on one side moderates, more conservative Democrats saying, look, Democrats as a party moved too far to the left this year. There was too much the voters heard about socialism and about defunding the police. On the other side, you have progressives saying, well, the real culprit for underperformance down ballot is organization or the lack thereof, and underinvestment in really pulling the base together, reaching new voters, and that kind of thing. It's the very same debate. My first reaction to the results was just an unwillingness to say anything definitive, because I think it confounded so many ideas about how the election was supposed to work. You had a lot of skepticism early on that Biden would be able to pull this through before the pandemic. Go back to 2019 when he first entered as a candidate. Was he going to be strong enough? Did he have the stamina to really beat Donald Trump? Were voters going to be looking for more of the same? Apparently they were. At the same time, you had a lot of confidence over the course of this year that as a consequence of the pandemic, as a consequence of the economic downturn, you would see not only Biden win, but Democrats sweep in, take the Senate, expand their House majority. The latter two things did not happen. And so I think there needs to be a real parsing of data in the weeks ahead, not exit poll data. I mean, that can tell you some things, but it's generally pretty unreliable for a lot of reasons. But in the weeks and months ahead, we're going to see larger surveys, more detailed looks at the county by county, precinct by precinct results that can tell us certain things about what happened over the course of the election. As somebody who was employed to have takes about all of this, I have been working on a couple of pieces on this question. I'm working on right now, and I guess the intervention that I'm trying to make into the left, moderate Democratic Party wars right now is just think about 2018, right? In 2018, you had a number of messages being offered by the Republican Party that were trying to brand Democrats with a broad brush, say that the party was too far left. You heard a lot about Antifa. You heard a lot about Confederate monuments. You heard a lot about the migrant caravan. And tied into that last issue, you heard a lot about abolishing ICE. Nobody talks about this anymore. But one of the big subjects of the 2018 midterms was the idea that Democrats are going to abolish immigration and customs enforcement. They ran this all across the country in competitive districts. Abigail Spanberger, who is one of the louder voices now saying that the party did something wrong here in moving left, she came in that year amidst a lot of talk in Virginia about MS-13 mortars in Northern Virginia. I covered that race a little bit for the New Yorker. And despite all that, and frankly, despite Democrats, mainstream Democrats, taking abolish ICE a lot more seriously than they took to defund the police. You had Kristen Gillibrand saying that we should abolish ICE. You had Bill de Blasio saying that, and the House progressives introduced a bill to abolish the agency. Despite all that, Democrats won 41 seats that year, right? So there has to be a more sophisticated analysis than Republicans ran with this kind of messaging, and Republicans run on messaging that says the Democrats are too far left. Democrats lose. I think it's a little bit more complicated than that. I think that there are a lot of difficult and weird things about this year that people are going to try to parse. It was a year in which, if you were running in a tough district, you didn't necessarily have the campaign opportunities that you might have had in a normal year, thanks to the pandemic, to get out there and reach voters. It was a year in which voters thought the economy was doing much better than people who sit on Twitter or read the news all day thought it was doing, just based on the metrics, because people had a very real and substantial boost to their take-home income as a consequence of the coronavirus stimulus. And September, Gallup found that 56% of American voters thought that they were doing better this year than they were 4 years ago, which is a remarkable number. In 2012, the last election for an incumbent, that number was something like 45%. So there was a lot of weirdness happening here. I think that Democrats kind of assumed that the coronavirus would do a lot of the work of this election for them, but the impact doesn't seem to have been as uniformly negative as people thought it was going to be. Maybe you should have seen some more stronger economic messaging. Maybe you should have seen more of an effort to tie the rest of the Republican Party to Trump. I think all of that's going to be, teased out and argued about over the course of the next few weeks and months. But, those are just rambling thoughts that I have right now, sitting here as somebody without the confidence to draw broad meta narratives right now.
No, not at all rambling. And I actually really appreciate that level of nuance, because I very much share the feeling that there's a lot of lessons to be learned, and it's very hard to have sort of one big takeaway right now.
Well, Katie, can I respond to that? Because that's literally my area of research.
Absolutely, yeah, please do.
Yeah. So if you've been following me on Twitter this week, then you'll know I've been doing meta-analysis based on data and my forecast, right? So for those of you who aren't aware, I offer a quantitative forecast like Nate Silver. It's a competing forecast, but it is very different. It's not another probability forecast, and it's not, it argues a completely revised theory of electoral behavior from my experience as a political scientist and my dissertation work in polarization. So it argues that because of polarization, we don't, especially on the left, understand voter behavior, how it's been impacted by polarization, which is profound, okay? Because the fact that Donald Trump is the president of America is something that should not and could not happen in a country that's not sick, right? Our country is very sick. It's a infected body politic, and it's infected not just with coronavirus, it's infected with a disease called polarization. Polarization isn't a buzzword. It's an empirical, measurable, quantifiable thing that manifests in our institutions like Congress and the presidency and the courts, but also in the people. And negative partisanship is something that had been documented as part of polarization. It's a motion that is grounded in someone's own party. So if you're a Democrat or a Republican, you have that ground, that orientation. But negative partisanship means, okay, as a Democrat, if Republicans win, if Donald Trump wins, he's gonna put in Republican policies, but also maybe Supreme Court picks. And suddenly the Supreme Court's gonna go from 5-4 and sometimes legalizing gay marriage to 6-3, and it's Gilead all of a sudden, right? And I'm fearful, not just that I hate Donald Trump, but I'm literally fearful of the potential for that to happen. And therefore, I'm much more likely to participate in politics. And so when we look at 2016, you really had an electorate that was focused on inter-party factionalism. The Bernie Sanders progressive wing of the party staged that large, very, much more competitive than 2016 nomination battle, where they really took Clinton to the wire in terms of competing. It hit the same wall it hit in 2020. It was always going to hit the same wall, which is support amongst Black voters, which is that safety valve for mainstream Democrats or establishment Democrats. But still, it was a very rigorous challenge, and it left a bad taste in the mouth of the progressive wing. And having been in power for 8 years, they had forgotten what it's like. Those Bush years especially were never things that Zoomers experienced, and a good chunk of millennials. So they were very, very nitpicky, right? Clinton, her record as a corporatist especially angered them. So when we think about the Midwest, many people don't understand what happened, and that's because the narrative has largely been painted by Nate Cohen and Dave Wasserman and Nate Silver, who has focused primarily on a certain aspect, which is white working class voters, and they are realigning away from Democrats. It's part of a big long-term coalitional realignment story, but it's a realignment, which means they are going permanently that way. And so it's not something like where they're going to be coming back, right? And in the Midwest, another story happened, and that was in Wisconsin, for example, like the big Florida election where Ralph Nader ruined the election was less than 2% of third-party voting. In Wisconsin in 2016, between third-party and write-in, we're talking about almost 7%. 7% of the two-party vote going. And Clinton, of course, lost by less than 1 point to Trump. That doesn't really get talked about as the main driver of the Midwestern switch to Trump, but that's the story in 7 of 9 swing states. It's, a 1 point or less loss for the most part. And these third party write-in balloting, it's 3, it's 4, it's 6, 7 points. And so what really, informed my thesis when I hit the stage in 2018 was, you guys are really undercutting what's going to happen. It's not going to be 23 seats to maybe take this majority. We're going to look at a 40-seat surge. And it's not because they're talking about healthcare, though it will look like that incidentally. It's going to be backlash to Donald Trump. It's going to be this referendum, because even though Democrats fail to run a nationalized election, they're going to naturally get a nationalized effect. And of course, it was really pretty crazy, because I looked at like Abby Spanberger's district, which is at that time rated lean Republican. And I'm like, that district is 100% going to flip. And this is 5 months before election day, right? So moving forward to 2020, what we see happen is the bifurcation of 2 elections. The presidential map does what it was supposed to do. You see this large coalitional turnout surge of Democrats, and the Dem coalition is also, it's progressives, but it's not just that. It's voters of color, it's women, young voters, college educated whites have realigned significantly, but it's not just like people who were voting for Republicans. It's not even primarily that. It's actually white Zoomers and millennials, especially millennials who are now 40, who weren't voting, and now they're like, woo, really engaged, because they're seeing the GOP instituting all these policies that are really, they're not, they're very liberal, that group of people. And so that turnout has made the electorate younger and more diverse and more educated, which are, of course, the party of Trump is none of those things, right? So in the presidential map, it had freedom. It wasn't constrained to certain states. And in the states of the Senate map that were realigners, Arizona and Colorado are better educated but diverse. And so Colorado especially, it's got high college education. You see that effect, right? They flipped just fine. The one race that required persuasion was Maine, and as you see, it failed miserably, right? So what we really see are 2 stories. One, got nationalized. The Lincoln Project came in and nationalized the race too, made it a referendum on Trump and kept it there. But in the Congress, the DNC, the DCCC, the DSCC, really, in my opinion, they're the ones that sabotage that Senate map by keeping it like focused on issues, which is not the way that you campaign in a polarized era. So that's what I argue is a big mistake.
So, Walter, I want to ask you about this too, because I think what you're hearing Rachel describe is a wildly disparate group of people who might vote Democratic this election at the top of the ticket, but tend to not agree on much else. And so I would like to see what you sort of think about this question of the future fate of the Democratic Party, and what is it?
Well, first of all, I want to say that when Rachel and I had dinner in Iowa, the night of the Iowa caucuses, she was talking about one of the big differences with 2016 was there was going to be a significant drop in third-party votes. And the point of drop in third-party votes is third-party votes allow Trump to win states with less than 50%.
Yeah.
What you have is a president who, for the most part, even when the economy was the greatest economy since the pyramids, as he would describe it if he knew enough about the pyramids, but even then he had a hard time getting his national approval rating above 43 or 44%. So this meant that this was a president who did not, if it's a binary yes/no choice, his number was going to be under 50, as it was. And that, for my mind, is the biggest takeaway. what fascinates me, going back to what Osita was smartly talking about in terms of the Democratic left versus the moderates, it is impressive to me that the Democratic Party, having just removed Donald Trump from power, a Democratic challenger getting the best percentage of the vote of any presidential challenger it's looking like since 1932, immediately go into almost fetal crouch depression that, oh my God, there's going to be a coup. And if there isn't a coup, oh, we didn't take the Senate, we're doomed. Can we just for a moment pause and realize that Joe Biden is going to be president on January 20th, and that there is so much a president can do even without congressional legislation, even without challenging the law as Trump did regularly?
Well, I think that it would be
unfair.
You
can call me Pollyanna.
No, I mean, I think it's a point well taken about the sort of quick pivot from, beating Trump to then immediately a circular firing squad. But to your point, I think that what a lot of people may be struggling with is the fact that Trump leaving office was a larger shared goal, but that there's so much that people are still confronting in the middle of a pandemic or recession, in a warming planet, that the sort of the nature of the crisis is so urgent and being materially felt that this question of what does the Democratic Party do even with executive power right now, I think does feel very urgent to many people.
Can I just plug very briefly my big Biden piece coming out on the next print issue of, yes, The New Republic. And that is that you can make the optimistic view that if the vaccine news from Pfizer and other places is true, that Joe Biden will preside over the most miraculous turnabout in America, which would be a return in sometime in 2022 or late 2021 to something resembling normal life. And with it, there is so much pent up economic demand that even if the stimulus coming out of Congress is not as much as liberal economists or I want, that there could still be a real robust jump in the economy. And those two facts may dominate everything for the next 2 years.
I like your optimistic.
Yeah, that's nice.
I'm gonna try to carry it with me. But so to shatter this moment of optimism, Rachel, I want to turn to you and say, while we're on this theme of existential crises that we're all confronting right now, people felt, I think, again, a little bit betrayed by the polling this time around. And is that, so my question is for you, is that a fair sense of betrayal? And sort of in the same way that I wanted Osita and Walter to say, where to for the Democratic Party, like where to for the polling industry? What happens next?
Yeah, I don't poll. I mean, I have polled in the past. My polling was always, by the way, correct every time I polled, but that's because I don't have, so I don't know. I haven't done the diagnostic yet. When I did my diagnostic for the 2016 polling, I had no idea I was going to be a national analyst, let alone a political forecaster like Nate Silver, let alone one that could predict the outcome of the presidential map almost to the T 16 months before the election. So y'all should probably Google and check it out, because I'm pretty proud, even though the New York Times editor, I think, really put it nicely. He said it had been horribly vindicated, because it is horrible. It is horrible that, my theory, which is as you just called out, you wanted me to come and make everyone sad, is pretty dismal. It's pretty dismal that I knew you couldn't persuade Republicans. I advised the Lincoln Project as the only Democrat. I'm never Trump Democrat, if that makes sense. I'm like an independent Democrat. But I knew, and I had told them when they asked me to join, I'm happy to join. Two things. I'm writing a book about how GOP electioneers drove, that in the media over there drove Republican voters nuts, right? You should know I'm doing that before I join, because you're in the book. And two, I am, you can't persuade Republicans. In fact, you can't persuade lean independent Republicans. And I will take that to the bank. And, I counseled them the whole time on that, which is why I wasn't the most used senior advisor, which is an unpaid volunteer position. It wasn't like I was in the cutting room of the Lincoln Project or anything like that. But I believed in the work because it is a combination of the ads and information they put out has a mobilizing effect. It was obviously very popular with Democrats and earned a lot of attention in media. But the most important function of Lincoln Project, which I am convinced without Joe Biden may not have won, it was the nationalization component, because Democrats up till now with the Georgia Senate race, they still they're gonna run the same strategy that they ran in 2020 for the congressional races, even though this is like 20-year, 10-year reapportionment redistricting, and they dropped the easiest fundamentals one could ever ask for an election, and they dropped the ball. They're still going to go down to Georgia and run on policy. They're going to run it on healthcare, and the GOP is running it on control of the Senate. That's what they're telling voters. You must vote in this election, because if you don't, the Democrats will control the Senate and Biden will turn the country into a socialist hellhole. And meanwhile, on the Democratic side, it's, hey, you should vote because of healthcare policy. I'm convinced the Lincoln Project's role was nationalizing, the concept of voting and nationalizing stakes. Like, if you don't vote, everything in the country will fall to an authoritarian. So I think it was really important. But the polling, was reflecting this, persuasion effect that they were going for. And, I was still skeptical that it would manifest. And that's why, I don't know what to tell you about Jamie Harrison's polling and the main polling. In 2016, the national poll was actually, it was really good. Like, the perception is that it was wrong. The forecasting models, I wasn't a forecaster. I was a first-year college professor, never thought I'd be sitting here. The forecasting models were wrong in 2016, but the national polling was actually really good. It said Clinton by 3, and that's what it ended up being. Some of the state polls were very wrong, but the national polls were right. 2020's national polls were much worse. The head-to-head on RCP is, I think, 7.7, like 7.7. And the margin is, what did you say, Walter? The margin is right now, since it's the biggest.
I think the margin is pushing 5, and the 7.7 actually was low, artificially low, because the Real Clear Politics included a lot of shady Republican polls.
Like, what was the 538 margin?
Yeah, that was close to 8 or 9.
Okay, because I didn't use it. I don't use, and I don't like either of them as aggregators, but I do use the RCP one just because it is less selective and whatever. And that's not as good, right? The error is going to be larger on 2020, and I know exactly what happened in the 2016 cycle. I wrote an article for Market Watch about it and defended like the changes. And it's not like pollsters want to be wrong, guys. Trust me, they don't want to be wrong. The culprit that I'll go into my investigation, though, with is this. Apparently, no one reads my research. I don't blame them, because Nate Silver and Nate Cohen tell them not to. But my research was very clear. I learned from 2018 that Republican turnout was going to go up, not down. I have a voter file analysis in the New Republic, in which I went and analyzed all the voters in 2018 and exactly what I thought would happen for my theory for voters on the Democratic side happened. They massively increased their turnout of Latinos and Black voters and women and young voters, and that made more Democrats in these House districts, and that's how those House districts flipped, not because moderate Republicans saying kumbaya with Democrats, okay? And that was important for Democrats to understand so that they didn't screw up 2020. But the other thing I learned in 2018 was that instead of rolling back turnout when they were fat and happy and controlled all 3 branches of government, Republicans were going to increase. They increased their turnout in 2018. So on my Twitter threads and my interviews, I have always been telling people between those 2 years till now, Republican turnout is going to be huge. Biden is not going to do better in the rural areas than Clinton, because that realignment's 2 years further down. And these union strongholds, as those unions have died, white grievance politics, it's called White Identity Politics, it's a great book by Ashley Jordina, political scientist. The thing that held white working class men to the Democratic Party and their wives was unions. And as the Republicans have destroyed unions, private sector unions, that link is gone, and they are moving on culture issues and sexism, racism, sorry to say, to the Republican Party. And that's just a fact that Scranton Joe wasn't going to happen. And the reason that they won still is that their campaign manager, Jen O'Malley Dillon, everyone should send her a @Jen O'Malley Dillon Twitter. Thank you, Jen, for still investing heavily on turnout of Democratic voters. Because if she had gone all in on Scranton Joe, we would be looking at 2 maps that went dry on us. Okay. And the fact that they still focused on Detroit and Philadelphia and Milwaukee and solving that turnout gap is why Joe Biden is president right now. So good job. And she was the first, I think, female campaign manager on the Democratic side
to win.
Right?
Susan Estridge lost with Michael Dukakis.
Yeah, lost, right? Yeah. I mean, winner.
I want to, just because I realized I want to be able to turn it to questions from the audience soon, but because this panel advertised itself as the question, where do we go from here? And I am keeping myself up at night thinking the same question. I would love to just hear from each of you before I turn it to questions about, since it seems like this is a pretty easy thing to do in a couple of minutes, can you please solve the problem of our democracy before I turn to audience questions? So Matt, I'll start with you because we haven't heard from you in a minute.
Yeah, I would abolish the Senate. Everything else just sort of falls into place from there. Legislatively, I guess if you want to take the moderate stance, you can just do what they did to the House of Lords in Britain about 100 years ago and simply strip out all of its legislative sort of power. Maybe give it the ability to delay legislation for a few months, but don't let it block legislation. They can still confirm ambassadors and do stuff like that. They can have fun. If that's the moderate stance you want. But yeah, that basically solves everything.
Love it. Just one clean step. Rachel, I'll turn to you next.
I spent a week begging the DNC, the DCCC, the DSCC, and the DLCC to call me because, again, I know it sounds bold and bossy, but I was like, look, I know exactly why A went well and B didn't. So call me. I will tell you why, and we can fix it because we can't go to Georgia and screw these. I mean, the odds are very stacked against winning these runoffs. The history is very clear. And the reason why they're January 5th and not January something else is because the college students haven't come back to town yet. Yeah, the GOP is very sure. So we would need to bring our A game. And so my next steps are going to get announced in the next couple of days and they're going to involve Georgia and some other things that I think people are going to be super jazzed about, so that people should watch. And it does involve the future of the Democratic Party getting brighter.
Wow. So we've got a cliffhanger from Rachel. Osita, how about you?
Yeah, well, I don't really know where we go from here, to be honest with you. I think that the one thing progressives should really be hoping and praying for is that this tantrum from Donald Trump ends with him starting a third party that is eligible and has ballot access in all 50 states, will siphon votes away from the Republican Party.
That would be great.
That would solve a lot of problems right then and there. Sadly, that's not something we can rely on. Sadly, is that although we should, we're not going to abolish the Senate. So it's really tough. Walter is correct that there is a good policy that President Biden could do with executive action. The challenge there, as Matt would probably be able to lay out better than I can, is that a lot of those things would be legally vulnerable, or at least challenged by conservative lawsuits that would then go to conservative judiciary and possibly to a now 6-3 conservative Supreme Court. So we'll see how that plays out. But if you're a progressive, like I don't know what to tell you really. I mean, I've written a piece basically arguing that direct action, a couple of pieces actually, arguing that direct action is actually led to a lot of positive policy change, certainly at the state and local level over the past 10 years. That should be something that I think we turn to more and more if the situation on the federal level gets to be even more dire, as though that were possible. But I think progressives should not only continue to organize and build infrastructure that can actually sustain progressive ideology beyond campaign season, as the conservatives did when they were building their movements. But I think that progressives should also think about specific policy issues and the specific actors and veto points that are going to be relevant on those policy issues, and thinking about how to pressure them. Progressives should be thinking about labor organizing. Rachel talked about the role of unions. I think that is a very important thing to point out as part of the story of how progressives, or the Democratic Party broadly speaking, had their base of support erode in some of the areas that were relevant in this election. That base is obviously continuing to erode amongst white working class voters. So, I think that all of that is going to be necessary, kind of on the ground thinking about building infrastructure, organizing in the workplaces, outside of workplaces, during campaign season, outside of campaign season. Beyond that, just hoping for the best, I guess, because I don't really have the answers.
If I could add a slightly more serious answer, just building off of what Osita said, I'm from Nevada, as anybody who has followed me on Twitter for more than 2 seconds has figured out.
Or anyone who heard you pronounce it correctly.
Yeah. I give that tutorial to every newsroom I go to. And the thing about Nevada is that Nevada would probably still be a red state if it wasn't for the organization machine that they've built there. Which is a combination of the resources that Harry Reid poured in when he was the Senate Majority Leader, and sort of the de facto leader of the state party. And if it wasn't for just the on-the-ground work that the Culinary Union and other labor organizations do in Clark County and the Las Vegas area to just get turnout in the polls. Nevada was the only state that really sort of defied Trump's wave in 2016 for that exact reason. And as we've seen, although they took a while to count ballots this time, in the end, it turned out to not be very close there either. And so when I think of what sort of models Democrats and liberals on the left can look for, the two that come foremost to mind are one, Nevada, and two, what Stacey Abrams has done in Georgia, where she's proven that you can go into what was, 5 years ago viewed as the reddest of ruby red states, and organize the communities there that traditionally do not have a voice in politics, either at the state level or the national level, and you can get them to the polls and you can achieve something. I think as there's, and Democrats won't do a postmortem on any victory they have because they're Democrats. If you're concerned about progressive politics, those two states are sort of the guiding path of the future. Like Osita said, for organizing in a way that can achieve tangible victories.
Before I turn to Walter, I want to stay there for just 1 minute and say that because I agree with you about where we actually did see successes, and it was very much a product of on the ground work that had been laid the groundwork for a very long time. Do we have a Democratic Party that can actually learn that lesson and invest and build those infrastructures and actually support existing infrastructure where it already exists, rather than trying to sort of reinvent wheels where they're already kind of rolling? And I'll put that back to you, Matt, just because I think that it's a really well taken point.
I think that's going to be one of sort of the things that's decided in the aftermath of this election. We've already seen Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in that New York Times interview earlier this week bring up the fact that, the DCCC, the Democratic Senate campaign arm, they both heavily focus on personalities. And, a continual frustration for progressive organizers over the past decade is that you have had machinery built up to sort of get that grassroots support going. Organizing for America, the organization that Obama built and then sort of let wither away. And that you haven't really seen that come up again. And so while you have personalities run every year, you don't have the machinery, the organizations, the research, the local experience, the community ties necessary to translate sort of that, whatever enthusiasm may exist, to translate that necessarily into political support.
Can I just quickly to add on, I want people to understand how badly these organizations screwed the country overall, Democrats specifically, in this cycle, in comparison to what the Republican Party has done for their constituency. This is the second reapportionment. The first one, the 2010, Republicans were coming out of the wilderness, having murdered the economy. They expected to be out in the, they thought another FDR event where they weren't given the keys to the car for a long time, but they still planned in case, right? So they strategically got together, they developed Red Map, which was going to bring them potentially into power in all of these state legislatures to take over redistricting. And, planned like, okay, what if we can win a bunch of seats in 2010? Michael Steele, who's now my friend, develops this nationalized referendum mistakes framing model that I'm trying to bring to the Democrats now. And, they pick up 63 seats in the House. They implement this Red Map plan that they had at the ready because they prepared just in case. They wipe Democrats out in state elections for, years, 1,000 seats plus, and redistrict the maps brutally. Okay, Democrats, you would think, would be like, okay, well, we got caught with our pants down in this 2010 cycle. 2020 is going to be our year, though, right? Certainly, as we come up through 2016, Donald Trump's going to be the most unpopular guy in the world. 2020 is our year. What do we need to put in place? We need massive Spanish, Latino infrastructure. Where? Texas, Arizona, Florida. Let's get down there. Permanent staff on the ground, as Matt's describing, building that infrastructure, building with the progressive grassroots communities, this, organizations. And even if you didn't get it yet, Stacey Abrams comes out in 2018 as My Theory and Model debuts. These two are married. Beto and her and My Theory all come out at the same time. They do none of these things. They do none of them. I mean, it's a malpractice that is so severe that, in my opinion, the C-suite of the DNC, the DCCC, and the DSCC organizations, you guys should be calling for them to be, all of them should be terminated. All of them. They have no right to sit there after what they have cost in the most winnable fundamentals that we've ever could have hoped for. So that's me. That's my take. And that's why I'm 3 days, couple days. I'll let you know.
Okay. And before I turn to audience questions, Walter, I want to have you weigh in.
Okay, I just want to say, number one, I totally agree with Rachel that elections are won on turnout in this era. I think governing, however, is really dependent on persuasion. And the fact is that to pick up votes here, to pick up votes there, going to what Matt said, the fear I have is not the Senate. The fear I have is the Democrats losing the House in 2022 and the devastation there, that it is not the structure that is the problem. But I also think that there is a preaching to the choir problem that the Democrats have had in terms of so many protests have been almost geared to, we're going to feel so good about this protest versus who are we going to persuade by the protest. And in a situation, I believe in organizing, I believe in all of this, but I also think that doing things that make it harder to win elections while you're not running in elections is not a wise strategy. And I don't want to, in the next 18 months, downplay persuasion as a strategy.
I do.
No, I mean, I'm talking about a legislative strategy.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I'm talking about getting things done in Washington as opposed to winning over some former Democrat in Lynn County, Iowa.
Yeah. I mean, I just don't know what we're going to be facing with McConnell. I think there's a potential that he's going to come in with the understanding that if he stymies Biden, which will hurt all Americans, and Biden obviously has belief that he'll have the old cooperation that he used to have. But if McConnell comes in, his thinking may be, I kind of good faith trick him for 4 or 5 months, get down there, then it's campaign season, I give him nothing, and I wipe the Democrats out. That's what will happen, by the way, if we leave the DNC, the DCCC, and the DSCC in charge of messaging and narrative shaping. So, because they will not tell the voter what is happening here, right? They don't understand that, on the other side, they're running this strategic operation that is, moving them like a game of chess. And they're like, how Walking Dead zombies look before a human comes into the scene. They're all just stumbling. That to me is how the DNC does strategy. It's they're so aimless when the other side is sharpening knives and like being like, oh, let's do this into them. And we've got to be better, and we can no longer give ourselves to adages like, oh, I'm not a member of an organized party, I'm a Democrat, ha ha ha, because people's lives depend on us being better.
So Rachel, one of the questions that I'm seeing come up from some of our audience today is, if you had to be crafting the strategy, what is the Democratic strategy? If you had a full dictatorship on what was to happen next, what is the move?
So what I'm going to be working on is a multi-modernization, I guess you would call it, right? Because there's a few problems going on. But let's talk specifically about the conversation of this week, which starts, of course, with Abby Spanberger's comments in the caucus call about her belief that the reason the Democrats underperformed on the Congress map isn't because they ran a issues campaign instead of a nationalized referendum campaign, and didn't knock doors because there's a pandemic and the other side's knocking doors, which are the two reasons that they underperformed. And it's because the GOP was mean to them about defund the police. There's always going to be some message that the GOP weaponizes, because that's what they do. They're very good at coming on the offense, and the Democrats are terrible at defending themselves and going back on the offense themselves. There's no offense that ever comes out of the Democratic Party towards the Republican Party. That is a thing that I will do. And the other thing is, all right, what is the real problem, right? Democrats, think about this. If I'm a low info voter, which most people are, they don't know who Mitch McConnell is. Like, you go through a grocery store, not if you're in maybe like the campus of Berkeley or someplace like that, but average America, and you stop people randomly. Do you know who Mitch McConnell is? I guarantee you they do not know who Mitch McConnell is, okay?
The butcher.
Pelosi, right? And you ask them, all right, so you're going through the grocery store and you ask them that, they have no idea who they are. So average American, and you're like, okay, average American, here's my platform. I'm a Democrat, da 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 da. And the Republican says, oh, they're a Democrat, their economic platform is socialist, they're terrible, they're Democrat. And then your response is, oh, no, I'm not one of those Democrats. I'm a fiscal conservative, right? The whole race is done. This is 2022, right? Might as well just not even have the election. The whole majority is gone, because here's what the voter hears, the one that doesn't know who Mitch McConnell is. They know at that moment that your party is flawed. Your ideology is flawed. Your economic policy is flawed. How do they know? Because your opponent has said that it's flawed, and you agree with them. You're like, yeah, that shit's flawed, right? You can't do that unless, like, for 20 something years, that's what the Democrat moderate messaging has been, right? Made sense at a certain time period. And we have to think about what's going on with the Republican Party now, where they had the Civil War and they've got all this coalitional factionalism. That was the Democrats in the 60s and the 70s. They lost 2 chunks of their coalition. They lost the Southern segregationists, bye-bye. But those people are still there. They're white conservatives, and they're in the South, and now they're Republicans. And that they also lost neocons, because believe it or not, guys.
And Rachel, because I want to make sure that some of the other questions, just in a two-line pitch, if I am that low information voter that you want to persuade, and you have 15 seconds between when I'm walking out of the grocery store into my car, what are you going to try to tell me?
Then I'm going to tell them what happened to the American middle class, right? So segueing into that, why would you ever want to tell a voter as a moderate Democrat that you are a fiscal conservative? Why would that sound attractive at all to a voter? You know why? It's because no one's ever told them, hey, 30 years ago when Republicanomics got enacted, the Canadians have the best middle class in the world, right? Not the Americans. And the reason why is because of Republicanomics. It has decimated the middle class. When we look at the Republican economic performance for the last 30 years, it is a record that should be easy to cut apart. But none of our moderate candidates do that. Everything that they do is defensive. They never go offensively across and start hacking apart at the GOP. Why hasn't the minimum wage been raised in 15 years? It's not because of the Democrats. It's because of the Republicans. They won't raise the minimum wage, right? Why, when Obamacare passed, right? How did Democrats respond to an attack about Obamacare? Well, I agree, that is a little bit of a problem. The right response is, well, yeah, but we insured 20 million people, right? That's how you defend a policy. You don't agree with your opponent about one small minutia that it doesn't work. You go on offense about the big policy achievement of insuring 20 million people, right?
I'm hearing do not get off defense, go into offense.
Yes.
A clear message, just a very okay, that's very, very useful. So I want to turn to, we're going to go a little bit over 8, but I'm going to leave this to the last question, because kind of the inverse of where do we go, and let's call it the sort of big tent anti-Trump we, sort of fractured as it might be. One of the audience members had the question of, where does Donald Trump go from here? And so Osita, I want to turn to you for that one.
Well, I haven't the foggiest idea where Donald Trump goes from here, to be perfectly honest with you. I mean, he is still going to be, no matter what happens, a major figure in the Republican Party. This is assuming that the big day liberals have hoped for, or he's taken, away with handcuffs. Assuming that never happens, he's still going to be a major figure within the Republican Party. He's still going to be somebody who can run in 2024. Somebody who apparently is interested in running in 2024. So we'll have to see, but he's going to be an independent center of power within the party. And everybody who's hoping to claim the mantle of the leader of the party is going to have to work around him, right? So you have a lot of people who've spent the last 4 years trying to flesh out what a conservative populism might be on like an intellectual level. People like Josh Hawley, Marco Rubio has increasingly gone in this direction. The assumption of that project has been, well, once Trump is gone, we'll be the people who carry on this kind of thing and make it more appealing to normal people. The issue is that if Trump is still functionally a major figure, how do you claim that segment of the party? How do you claim that faction of what conservative ideology is right now if Donald Trump is still there and saying, well, maybe I'm going to run in 2024? That's the big challenge. You have more moderate figures within the party who say, once Trump is gone, we're going to turn the page fully, and we're going to return to supply side economics, or talking openly and aggressively about supply side economics and the deficit and all this kind of stuff. And that'll be the party moving on from Trumpism. How do you do that if Donald Trump is still this hugely popular figure within the party? So I don't really know how all of that's going to work out. I do know that structurally speaking, the Republican Party is in extremely good shape. No matter what faction ends up taking over, the fact that you have the Senate the way that it is, as Matt talked about earlier, the fact that they now have a large share of judges in the judiciary, now that they have the Supreme Court, they're going to have maybe a good chance of taking the House in 2022, depending on how things go with Biden. The Republican Party is in great shape. They're going to have redistricting now. I wouldn't be too worried about the future of the party if I were on the right. And it's just amazing to think that if a couple of Senate seats had gone a different way, it'd be an entirely different occasion, and you'd be talking about the downfall of the Republican Party and how Democrats are going to come in and disempower it, which is what I wanted them to do if they took the Senate. Unless those runoffs go the Democrats' way, both of them in January, the Republican Party is in good shape no matter what happens to Donald Trump.
And I think to Osita's point, Matt, if I can just have you weigh in too, because I think it is striking to think about what the composition of the courts means right now. and what it means sort of for a generation. So I think in terms of continuing on this idea, the future of the Republican Party and sort of Donald Trump's legacy, where can you just sort of speak to that a little bit?
Sure. I actually have a piece coming out tomorrow morning that sort of dives into where the Supreme Court goes from here. And, the fact that there are 6 conservative justices on the Supreme Court is going to be really the defining feature in some ways of Biden's administration. I mean, the economic factors will weigh as well. But we're also going to see probably a significant amount of movement on constitutional law from the court. We're going to see a lot of changes in areas that have not really actually seen that much development over the last few years. Things like the Second Amendment. We're going to see a much more breathtaking expansion of religious freedom claims to sort of excise LGBT communities from the scope of anti-discrimination laws. And we're going to see a lot of efforts to sort of tilt the scales of power in ways that benefit Republicans. I mean, if you look at what the Roberts Court did, just with 5 conservative justices, where they took the federal courts out of partisan gerrymandering. We're going to go through a whole redistricting cycle next year where the courts are not going to be able to stop them from creating heavily slanted partisan maps. If you look at what they've done to unions through decisions like overturning Abood, limiting their power, limiting their ability to fundraise, we're going to see more of that because now they can do everything they want and they don't have to worry about John Roberts defecting to liberals anymore. So we're going to see, probably a greater expansion of efforts to constrain what they call the administrative state, to make it harder for federal agencies to pass new regulations and rules. That's going to be devastating for a Biden administration since, unless, like Osita said, unless they manage to get lucky and take both seats in Georgia, most of Biden's, policy impact on the country will be through executive action, just as, Trump, who for different reasons, he couldn't, just intellectually could not negotiate with Congress. Biden won't be able to negotiate with Congress because McConnell has no incentive to do so.
Exactly.
And so what we'll have is Biden relying on executive action and the Supreme Court saying, oh, well, just kidding. The original meaning of the Constitution is that you can't take concrete steps to fight climate change. So yeah, I mean, I hesitate to call it Trump's legacy because these judges and justices aren't necessarily Trumpian. They're a product of sort of a deeper conservative movement. But that's going to be with us for the rest of my lifetime. I mean, the last, just as a final thought, the last judge appointed by John F. Kennedy, who stopped being president in 1963, died 2 years ago. That's how long these judges are going to be with us. If Amy Coney Barrett lives as long as Ruth Bader Ginsburg and stays on the court that long, she will still be deciding cases in 2059. So that'll be something that we'll be dealing with for decades to come.
And Matt, when I talk about stakes framing, do you remember the ads that you got in 2016 reminding progressives that, Clinton, she might have given some speeches to Wall Street, but if you don't vote for her, you might end up with a judge that, a conservative court you'll live with the rest of your life, because that was the stakes. Either a liberal court, the first time in 30 years, if you just vote for Hillary Clinton, the first time the liberal majority will be on that court. And with it, end to Citizens United, gun control, partisan gerrymandering, the first time progressives would ever be able to get those things because a liberal majority would be on that court for the first time. And the opposite, of course, would be that you would have a conservative majority and you'd be stuck with it probably for at least 10, 15 years.
Which is
those ads never ran.
Yeah. I mean, the problem that Democrats have always had is that while they care very much about issues that come before the court, they're very passionate about abortion, very passionate about LGBT rights, they have not really structurally thought of the courts in the same way that the Republican Party has. And I think one of the curious things that's going to develop over the next decade that I'm going to be interested in seeing is if Democrats finally start taking the courts seriously as an organizing tool, as an outreach tool, as sort of a voter turnout tool, as the right has over the last few years.
Well, they will, because I'll be focusing on those issues. But here's the thing.
Wait, Rachel, just to make sure that we get Walter into, just because we'll have to. It's okay.
It's because now it's a threat, right? Conservatives felt like abortion, birth control, gender and law, those things threatened conservatives, and that's what motivated them. And now we're threatened, right?
I also think, to Matt's point, this question of the pipelines that the right had created and the sense of seriousness that they brought to their plans for the court, I think that the question is if the Democratic Party and the left faction of the party and progressive faction of the party, and can create these same pipelines and invest in those same sort of infrastructures. But so we don't keep people over too late tonight, because I know it's been a long, long week for all of us. Walter, I just want to get your closing thoughts on, we've talked a lot about the Democratic Party and what next, but kind of where to for the GOP and Trump.
A couple of quick thoughts, because number one, the fact is the Democrats have been down this road before. During the Reagan years, Republicans, whatever they're running for, you ask them, what do you believe? I'm a proud conservative. You ask Democrats, what do you believe? Well, I really don't believe in labels. I'm not, I don't call me a liberal. And in fact, the word progressive, which I still dislike as a political label, was originally a way of Democrats covering the fact that they weren't liberals because liberals polled badly. And the lack of authenticity of moderate candidates who are constantly dodging and weaving from saying anything of substance at all is really politically damaging. I also think that the Democratic recruitment theory, do we have a veteran, perhaps a woman veteran? That's really important to have a veteran. Has, shall we say, reached Amy McGrath diminishing returns. And finally, as you talk about the bleak look for the Democrats, remember that one of the big structural advantages that the Republicans have always had, going back to FDR, going back to Eisenhower, was a tremendous advantage in political money. This was what Citizens United was going to codify forever. The Democratic fundraising machine in 2020 was amazing. It was spent stupidly.
Yeah.
It did not pay the dividends it should have been, but the whole Republican idea that money is going to save us because there's always a Koch brother, there's always a Sheldon Adelson, has proven wrong.
Yeah.
And if the Democrats could combine that financial advantage with a way of using that financial advantage structurally for organizing, the future may be a lot more promising than we think it is right now.
That's correct. That's good. Yeah.
I love that as a takeaway of spending money in the places where it will actually mean something.
Yeah, not
So nice. So I want to thank you all again for joining me tonight. This has been a very interesting conversation, but I can't say that I'm leaving feeling any better than I went into it. But
I tried.
I appreciate it all the same. And just thank you again so much for being here tonight. And thanks to everybody who tuned in this evening. It was a pleasure to spend the hour with you.
It's fun, guys.
Thank you.
It was nice meeting those of you I didn't know.